Welcome to the deep dive.
Mhm.
I think it's safe to say you're here because you're as fascinated as we are by this really pivotal moment in history.
Absolutely.
Emperor Hirohito's role in World War II. Now, we all know it's a super complex subject, tons of documents,
Yeah.
analyses, and interpretations out there, but who has the time to sift through all that?
Right.
That's where we come in. We're going to try to get to the core of what you really need to know.
Exactly. I think what makes this whole thing so intriguing is that central question that just hangs over everything.
Yeah.
Was Hirohito the mastermind?
Mm-hmm.
Was he a driving force behind Japan's wartime aggression?
Oh,
Or was he more of a figurehead?
Like a Han.
Yeah, a pawn swept along by, these incredibly powerful currents of militarism.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here to figure out. We've got a ton of sources to dig into. We've got historical analyses, wartime accounts.
It's for interpretations. Oh, yeah.
We're going to lay it all out, give you a clear and nuanced understanding of Hirohito's role in all of this.
Okay, so let's dive in. To really understand Hirohito and this whole debate about his role, we kind of have to go back to the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Set the stage. He was born in 1901 and became emperor in 1926.
Right.
So what was Japan like back then? What did he step into?
Well, it's actually really fascinating. Early 20th century Japan, even though they had this Meiji constitution that, on paper gave the emperor a good deal of power. In reality, by the time Hirohito takes the throne, the military, they have a ton of influence.
Right.
Nationalist sentiment is on the rise. There are all these different political factions
Competing?
competing. Yeah, and especially within the military, vying for power.
So you're saying that even though he was emperor, he wasn't necessarily calling all the shots?
Exactly. I mean, he had the formal authority, but the actual control.
Yeah.
Much more complicated.
So it wasn't as simple as emperor equals all-powerful ruler.
Nope, not at all.
Okay, so
Yeah.
initially the expectation might have been that, okay, he is a constitutional monarch. He's a symbol.
The face of Japan.
We're at the face of Japan. Well, the real power lies with these other groups. But our sources suggest things start to change, especially as Japan gets more and more ambitious in Asia.
Yeah, in the 1930s, things really start to shift. It's interesting because the sources show how Japan's military victories early on, they get tied to the emperor's image.
They use him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Propaganda,
But
public
yeah,
ceremonies.
The whole 9 yards.
They make him this symbol of national unity and ambition right when Japan's becoming more and more aggressive.
So they're intentionally building up this image of him.
Yeah. It's not a coincidence. They're crafting this narrative of imperial authority intertwined with military power. It's very deliberate.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question, the core of this whole debate.
Right.
Was Hirohito just a symbol being used by the military?
Uh-huh.
Or did he genuinely believe in and support Japan's expansionist policies?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And our sources, they offer evidence for both sides.
Right.
That's what makes this so fascinating and so tricky.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you can't deny that Japan was becoming increasingly militarized. I mean, it's just a fact.
Right.
And the military, driven by leaders like General Tojo, they embark on these huge expansionist campaigns.
Yeah.
Manchuria in 1931.
And then China.
Full-scale invasion of China in 1937.
Right. And that's before the official start of World War II.
Yeah. These are major foreign policy decisions. And the military is the one driving the bus.
So where does Hirohito fit into all of this? I mean, these are major events. Manchuria, China. Was he just finding out after the fact?
Well, the evidence suggests he was informed. He knew what was going on. And it's not just that he was informed. Some historians have analyzed wartime records, and they show Hirohito was present at important military and political meetings.
Oh, wow.
Meetings where they were talking about and quite possibly endorsing
These expansionist plans.
yeah, these very plans. So it's not like he was completely in the dark.
So he was in the loop.
To a certain extent, yeah.
Okay, so we know he's at least aware of these aggressive moves. Now let's talk about what's probably the most controversial part of this whole thing. The decision to go to war with the United States in 1941, and of course the attack on Pearl Harbor. What do the sources tell us about Hirohito's role in that?
That's where the debate gets really heated.
Right.
Because some historians, they look at the evidence
Yeah.
and they say Hirohito knew what the military was planning.
Like their strategy.
Yeah. He knew they thought a decisive strike against the U.S. was necessary.
Okay.
And the fact that he didn't explicitly oppose it.
They see that as implicit support.
Exactly.
But then there's the other side of the
I
argument,
have a
right?
counter argument.
By 1941, the military is so powerful.
Oh, yeah. They're entrenched.
Maybe Hirohito couldn't have stopped them, even if he wanted to.
That's a really important point. By that point, the military had gained so much power within the government
Right.
that it's argued that Hirohito may not have even known all the specifics.
Or that if he tried to resist,
Yeah.
it would have been pointless
Yeah.
or even dangerous.
It's a possibility, however, and this is crucial to remember,
Yeah.
he was still the emperor. He had the ultimate authority on paper.
So, regardless of how much power the military had,
Right.
Hirohito still sanctioned the war effort.
Ultimately, yeah, and that's significant when we're talking about his responsibility.
So it adds another layer to the debate.
It does.
Let's talk a bit more about Hirohito's relationship with the military leadership.
Okay.
He was technically the supreme commander.
Right.
What did that actually mean in terms of power and influence?
Well, there's no doubt that the day-to-day running of the military was in the hands of the general staff.
Right.
But the title Supreme Commander did imply that Hirohito had the ultimate say.
Like the final word.
Yeah, especially for really big decisions like starting a war, at least in theory.
On paper.
Yeah, on paper they needed the emperor's approval.
Okay, and then there's General Hideki Tojo,
Oh, yeah?
Prime Minister and Minister of War.
A major figure.
A major figure. What can our sources tell us about his relationship with Hirohito?
From what we can gather, Tojo and Hirohito, they talked a lot.
Okay.
Especially as the war went on and things got tougher for Japan.
But what were those conversations like?
Exactly. That's the big question. Was Hirohito actively involved in shaping policy? Or was Tojo just informing him of decisions that had already been made?
So more of a formality.
Yeah. There are diaries and memoirs that give us glimpses.
But it's not totally clear.
Not totally. Historians are still trying to figure out the dynamics of their relationship.
So for you listening,
Uh-huh.
the question becomes, did Hirohito have the power, and more importantly, the will, to steer Japan away from this aggressive path?
And that's a tough one to answer. We know his approval was needed for major things.
Like Pearl Harbor.
Right. And we don't have any clear evidence of him trying to stop the expansionist plans.
So it makes you wonder.
It does.
Okay, now we need to address something.
Yeah.
It's a really dark and disturbing aspect of this period in history.
Uh-huh.
The war crimes and the atrocities committed by the Japanese military. It would be wrong to talk about Hirohito's role and not talk about this.
Absolutely. It's uncomfortable, but essential.
Yeah. It's a vital part of understanding the whole picture. And it raises even more questions about Hirohito's accountability.
It does. I mean, the things the Japanese military did, the scale of the brutality.
It's horrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
The Nanking Massacre, the Comfort Women Unit 731's horrific experiments.
All of it happened while Hirohito was emperor.
Yes. So we can't ignore the question of his responsibility. Did he order these things? Did he stand by and let them happen? Did he implicitly approve?
Let's talk about Nanking.
Okay.
The Nanking Massacre in 1937. Hundreds of thousands of civilians murdered. What do we know about whether Hirohito knew this was happening?
Well, our sources don't say he directly ordered it.
Okay.
But some historians say there's evidence he was told what the military was doing in Nanking.
And he did nothing.
He didn't condemn it publicly. He remained silent. And that raises serious questions.
Like, if he knew about the brutality, why did he speak out?
Exactly. Especially as a head of state, why no outcry?
And it's not just Nanking.
Right.
You have the Comfort Women. The horrific things Unit 731 was doing.
Uh-huh.
As emperor, wasn't Hirohito supposed to oversee the military? To be accountable for their actions?
That's what many people argue.
Yeah.
That he was the head of the military in name and symbol, and that from a modern ethical standpoint, he had a duty to ensure his troops behaved humanely.
So they're saying his silence.
On Nanking, on the Comfort Women on Unit 731.
That it implies some level of acceptance?
Or at the very least, a failure to acknowledge the suffering.
Okay, so the war ends.
Hmm.
Japan surrenders. And it's interesting that a lot of military and political leaders were tried for war crimes.
Uh-huh.
But Hirohito wasn't.
Right.
Why not?
It was a strategic decision,
Right.
mostly driven by the United States,
Okay.
MacArthur in particular,
Right.
the Allies, particularly the U.S. They felt keeping the emperor was the best way to ensure stability in Japan.
So they kept him to make the transition smoother.
Yeah. They were worried that getting rid of the emperor,
Or putting him on trial.
exactly, it could cause chaos.
Lead to resistance. Make the occupation a nightmare.
That was the thinking.
So basically they let him stay on as emperor.
Yeah, but with less power.
More of a symbol.
Yeah, a figurehead, shielded from any legal consequences.
A very controversial decision.
Very. I mean, it made sense politically at the time.
But it still raises ethical questions.
Absolutely.
What about apologies? Did Hirohito ever apologize for the war, for what Japan did?
Well, after the surrender, he gave a radio address
Right.
acknowledging the end of the war, but it didn't include a clear apology for Japan's actions.
Or for the devastation?
No. And even later, anytime he expressed remorse,
Yeah?
it was very carefully worded, very indirect.
So people still wonder.
They do. Was he truly sorry?
Okay, so we've gone through all this evidence, all these different perspectives.
Right.
And I have to say, there's no easy answer to the question of Hirohito's complicity.
It's not black and white.
No. If you look at the arguments for complicity, they'll point to the fact that he knew what the military was doing.
Right.
He approved major decisions. He didn't condemn the atrocities.
And they'll say that even in a system dominated by the
He
military.
still had some power
Yeah.
that he could have used
Potentially.
to stop things from getting so bad.
It's a valid point.
And then you have the counter-argument
Yeah.
that the military was just too powerful,
That he was trapped.
that he was basically powerless.
And maybe he thought he was doing what was best for Japan. Right? Or maybe he just didn't have the power to challenge the military.
It's true, the Japanese government at that time,
Yeah.
the military had a lot of autonomy.
A lot of power.
So I guess what our sources ultimately show is that
Yeah.
figuring out whether Hirohito was complicit, it's still a debate
A complex one.
with valid points on both sides.
Exactly. You have to weigh all the evidence, all the different perspectives.
And even if you can't definitively say whether he was complicit or not, one thing's for sure.
What's that?
Hirohito's reign had a huge impact on Japan and the world.
Absolutely. No doubt about that.
His actions, and even more so his inaction during that time,
Yeah.
they raised some really important questions about power,
About authority.
about responsibility.
Especially during wartime.
So, to everyone listening,
Uh-huh.
after taking this deep dive with us,
Yeah.
what stands out to you the most? What piece of evidence or argument is the most convincing when you're thinking about Hirohito's responsibility?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. And what does it tell you about the nature of power? About individual accountability during a conflict like World War II? It's something to ponder. And that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for listening.